Great representation tonight. I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight. My name is Tim Cole, and I get to work with Waypoint Church Partners, and we start a couple of new churches every year. We've got a new church starting in 13 days, just under 2 weeks now in Virginia Beach, Virginia, called Journey Christian Church. But we also serve established churches and leaders with strategic services to help them get on mission and stay on mission. And so we have started this webinar series more than 4 years ago to try to provide some training for key leaders in the church in different areas. And so one of the, so for example, elders or prayer team leaders, missions teams leaders, and one of the areas that we have addressed every year, at least once, if not twice per year, is in the area of safety and security. And so that's the topic that we have tonight. I do want to share my screen here and say thank you to Mid-Atlantic Christian University, our sponsor for our webinar series since it first began. And we're very thankful for them. And we have another alumnus on from Phil as our presenter tonight. And so if you have not been able to attend many of our webinars, I want to let you know that we have a YouTube channel. And if you go to our YouTube channel, Waypoint Church Partners, you'll see that we have a number of playlists by category. You can just go to videos and see all of them, but you can go to playlists, and there's a playlist just for safety and security. So we've got, by now, I think this will be our 6th webinar just on this topic in particular, but we've got a number of different playlists there that you can watch and even recommend to friends of yours that are in the church in one of these other areas of ministry. And so we'd love for you to do that. But tonight we've got Phil Murdoch as our presenter tonight, and he's going to be talking to us about safety teams, and particularly the title of it is The Art of De-Escalation. We talk a lot about safety and security. It goes all kind of different directions, but it's really on the front end on how you can help at least avoid things rather than having to deal with them reactively, is to be a little bit more proactively and be proactive. And so I'm excited about that. But you're probably wondering, how in the world do we got a preacher? Phil's the preacher at one of our church plants, Life Point Church in Tuano, just outside of Williamsburg, Virginia. They got into a beautiful new facility just in the last couple of months. And after a long time in the wilderness, 15 years portable. So they have their own place now. And so I don't know what he's going to do every week, since he doesn't have to set up and tear down and do all that. But we're wondering, how in the world does a preacher have anything to say about safety and security? But Phil has a pretty significant background in this area. So Phil, tell us the story from a Bible college graduate, how you got the background in safety and security.
Yeah, so a little bit of a different path, I guess you could say. Been in ministry since 1994, started at the Rappahannock Church of Christ, saw Keith's on here. And I think they hired me when I was 18 years old. So I had no clue what I was doing, but love that church, love those people, and fell in love with ministry. But I guess I was about 21 years old, moved to Martinsville, Virginia, and worked at Rich Acres Christian Church. Some of you guys may know Rich Acres. But while I was there, I don't know, I just got the itch to do something different. When I moved to Martinsville, I was trying to find, I tell people, no matter how old you are, you need friends. And I was having a hard time connecting and finding guys my age to be friends with. And the first guys I bumped into that were about my age that seemed to like some of the same things that I did were a group of firefighters, oddly enough. And they invited me to start coming to the firehouse. I was reluctant at first because I had some predispositions in regards to what I thought about firefighters and firehouse, some of which have been proven true. And but I started going up there and hanging out, and I fell in love with these guys. They became, I mean, it's sort of the cliche thing to say, my brothers. Started working for the city of Martinsville, did that for several years. Started going through different classes, through both state and federal classes. When we moved here to Plant Life Point back in 2006, one of the things that excited me was there was what they call a combination fire department just down the street, which is both volunteer and career. Got really involved there, was the number 2 guy for a while, and then I was the fire chief for a number of years. And I just recently stepped down from that a couple of years ago because Life Point was growing. We were about to move into our first place, so it was time to sort of break from that responsibility. In addition to that, working both with the local government and the state side of things, also worked a little bit with FEMA, DHS, with some USAR teams out of Virginia Beach, which they deployed to sort of urban environments that have experienced disasters such as tornadoes or earthquakes or hurricanes, stuff like that. So that my life path of sort of ministry and safety, with all these different classes and certifications I have in that, have sort of come together. And so for me, it's kind of it's sort of a passion of sorts of like, hey, I think our churches can do a better job. I think we have a responsibility for one, to protect the people who come onto our campus, our campuses. So for me, it became something I've become very interested in doing better, because of my two different backgrounds, but also just the responsibility I believe that we have to protect those who come and worship with us.
All right. Well, that's a great background, and it's pretty rare to have both of those together in ministry and in fire and safety. So we're glad that you joined us tonight. For all the people that are joining us tonight, I do want to let you know, a lot of you chimed in on the chat bar, but on the bar at the bottom of your screen, there's also a Q&A button. And so if you have a question as we go along, I want to invite you to hit the Q&A button, type in your question as you think of it, so that we have a queue over here on the side of our screen, so that we know what questions are there, and so we kind of gauge, can we answer that immediately or at the end, or can we kind of combine it with another question, that kind of deal. So the Q&A button is there at the bottom of your screen, and as Phil is sharing with us kind of the setup for this and the terminology, and then some of the pragmatic stuff at the end, you're probably going to have questions. It is interesting that good security is not required to, or is not proportional to the size of the church. That any church can do a great job with security. Although typically the larger the church, the more somebody's thought about how are we making sure that everybody is safe and secure on our property. I was at an old church yesterday, and during the sermon, I'd heard the preacher preach before. He's a good preacher. So I got up and went to the bathroom, but then I was poking my head around the children's department at this older church, and kind of a dark hallway downstairs. But this lady came up to me and said, "Hello, can I help you? Basically, what are you doing down here?" And I told her, "I'm a husband of a children's minister. I know why you're asking, and good for you. And I'm just looking to see how you're doing your kids down here." So she showed me around. But it doesn't matter if you're a new church or an old church, big church or small church. You can do safety and security well, and you can train your volunteers to be on the lookout for the right things, and to trust their intuition about this just doesn't feel right. And so we've got some things in place when things seem a little bit out of order. And so, Phil, why don't you dive in and start setting us up with kind of the terms and making sure we're all on the same page for where we're going today.
Yeah. So this is just sort of, we're gonna hit some of these highlights here, and we're gonna hit some of the big ideas. We're obviously gonna have time to dig deep into some of the different ways that we can go about things. We're gonna hit some of the highlights of that, but I want to start by getting into the terminology. But you were just right there when you were talking, you were sort of interchangeably using the word safety and security, which has become very common in our churches today, where we sort of use the word safety and security to mean sometimes the same thing. And what I wanted to share with those that are on here, maybe you know this, maybe you don't know this, but one of the things that's happening in the safety security world, especially when it comes to churches, is a shift away from the terminology security team. I know when I first got into ministry, and for much of the last 30 years, that's what we had a ministry team called our security team, and that was made up of a group of volunteers. Oftentimes they had either a military background or law enforcement background, or maybe they were intimidating guys or gals, and we just said, "Hey, you would be good for this team." And so that's what we called it, was a security team. But what's been happening over probably the last decade, is a shift away from the term security to the term safety. And that's happened primarily because of some legal reasons and some liability reasons. In fact, there are some states now that if a church has what they deem a security team, then there's actually an additional insurance that must come with that. And there's also additional training that must happen with the volunteers of that team. And there's additional insurance that you have to protect that security team. And that's because the word security sort of comes with an inferred idea that you have trained individuals who are trained in the art of being security for your people. And as Tim alluded to, other than maybe some of our larger churches, most of our smaller churches or even medium-sized churches don't have necessarily a trained, certified security team. So one of the things I would encourage you, if you have a quote security team, is consider shifting that name to a safety team, because that's really more in line with probably what they're doing, and that is keeping people safe. It's going to go beyond just the security aspect, which a lot of people get really excited about. But really what their purpose is to keep people safe. And so that may be a fire alarm, that may be a medical emergency, we'll talk about in a little bit. That may be a weather situation, or the unruly person that shows up in the thing. So you're gonna hear me refer a lot to the term safety team. And I just wanna make sure we all understand what that means. Some may use security. I would encourage you to shift that terminology.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, we think of them as synonymous, but I think it makes complete sense that it sounds like a whole new level if you got the word security on your back. I am seeing a lot more churches that do have medical personnel at their church that have a shirt on and that they're the first aid person. And so I'm seeing that more and more commonly in churches. I don't know if you're seeing that as well. Of course, you're at your local church most of the time, but I think it's a comfort to know that there's someone in the building that if there's a medical emergency, that there's somebody there that's kind of been tagged to say you're it, to be helpful in that time.
Yeah, I would encourage, if you have the capabilities to do so, to really have two separate teams, to have a safety team, which we're going to talk more about in a little bit about what they would do. But also, I know here at LifePoint, we have a medical team, and we actually have a designated chair in our worship room with a sort of a medic kit underneath it. And everyone knows, and it's funny, a lot of our firefighters in the area, a lot of our paramedics, nurses, stuff like that, they like it because they have a saved seat every week whenever they're assigned or scheduled to work. So that is their chair. And everyone knows, from our children's ministry to our student ministry to our greeters, everyone knows if there's a medical emergency, that's where you go first. And so, yeah, I would encourage you, if you don't have that, if you want to know more about that, how that works, some guidelines for that, hit me up, and I'll be happy to share with some of the things that we've discovered in that. So medical teams, and then safety teams. And believe it or not, there's a third sort of layer to, there's more than 3 layers, but there's in the initial layer of security of a third, and that is your greeters. And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit either, because most people don't think of their greeters as being part of their safety team, but really your greeters are probably one of the most important parts of the safety element of your campus when you use it. One of the things I want to talk about, and I shared with Tim, I want to share tonight, is talk a little bit about weapons in church. And the reason I want to talk about this is one of the things that I've discovered, and maybe some of you have, if you go to a church safety conference, or if you watch any podcast, or you read any of the articles that are out there, the topic of active shooter gets a lot of attention. And the topic of weapons and concealed weapons and who can carry weapons gets a lot of attention in this in this sort of world of church safety. And I just want to be clear, like, I think we all need to prepare for that scenario, or at least have an idea of what we would do in that scenario. We obviously pray that that scenario does not happen. But the reality of it is, that is a low probability event on your campus. Now, I don't want to say you should never prepare for that, or you shouldn't think that through. But the problem that I've seen in many churches, and especially a lot of these conferences I've attended, is that is like where 80-90% of the time is focused. What are we going to do when the guy comes in with the gun, and who's going to take him out, and that's where it's all going. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to share, and I was talking to Tim about this, is, and I feel like I need to share this. I am not anti-guns. I've been around guns my entire life. In high school, I was captain of my marksmanship team. I, again, full disclosure, have a concealed weapons permit. I'm not anti-guns, but here's what I want to make really clear. If you're listening to me, whatever your church is at, you need to be, because you have a responsibility, you need to be very careful in how you go about authorizing either verbally or written or subtly when it comes to weapons use on your safety team. And let me explain to you why I say that. And this is just, for me, this is a soapbox. what I have discovered, so when I worked as a firefighter, we would have opportunities to go out and work with SWAT teams. Whenever they would do some sort of training, or if they were going to hit a house, meth lab, whatever it might be, oftentimes they would take firefighters, EMTs and medics with them to be there just in case someone got hurt. And I don't know how many of you who are watching this have had the opportunity to participate in live fire drills or even simulated fire drills where they're using maybe flashbangs and simunition and things of that nature. Most of our church people, most, not all, have very limited experience in what an active shooter situation would be. The chaos, people running everywhere, running. If you understand anything, if some of you out there are probably watching maybe your law enforcement background or military background, so you understand like shooting lanes and you understand ballistics. A lot of people who have concealed weapons permits who want to carry weapons in your church understand nothing about ballistics. I know this to be a fact. They don't understand that if they miss, the bullet doesn't stop magically. It continues to travel, and sheetrock does not stop a bullet. And so oftentimes what happens is we have individuals in our churches who are very well-intentioned, who have zero training in ballistics and active shooter. We have some folks in our church. We had a guy who was an air marshal. And just if you know anything about how the training that air marshals go through to shoot in that sort of tight environment, it's incredible. I had a few years ago, it's probably a couple years ago, right before COVID, I had a couple come to me, and they were probably in their 60s, and they came to me, awesome couple. And they shared with me that they had their concealed carry permit, and that they wanted me to know as the preacher that they were carrying their weapons on Sunday mornings, and that if something happened, that they were ready to act. And I appreciated them so much that they would share this. But I began to talk to them, and I just said, what kind of training have you had? Have you thought about what you do? How would you know when different people stood in the room and drew their weapons to protect who was the good guy and who was the bad guy? And if you thought about ballistics, and as we began to talk through this, you could just see them sort of slump back, and they were like, we had never thought about that. And most people don't. They're very well intentioned, but they don't have that kind of training. And so if you're in charge of a safety team, one of the things I want to encourage you is to be very careful on this. Also understand your church's liability, that if you in any way, shape, or form endorse someone to carry a weapon on your campus, you have assumed a level of liability that you need to be insured for and that you need to be comfortable with. And you need to be doing background checks. You need copies of their concealed weapon permits, and you need to record, and you need to have training for all of those individuals. And if you're not doing those things, do not necessarily endorse and stamp your safety teams. That's just my personal opinion on doing that. Now, if someone wants to carry in the state of Virginia, if they want to carry to protect them and their family, that's one thing. But as far as sort of deputizing those folks to serve in your church to have weapons, I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying I think a lot of churches sort of just do that without giving it a whole lot of thought. And if that's you and you're watching this, I would really, really encourage you to give it maybe more thought. And I say that as a person who was guilty of that myself. As we started looking into this and investigating sort of what our insurance provider desired for us to have, what the state of Virginia and other things, like what were we really comfortable with in regards to weapons in the church. So I'm amazed at the number of safety teams that are out there in churches who don't even do background checks on people on their safety teams. I mean, it's like if you're going to trust them with that role of keeping everyone safe, you should probably make sure that they can clear a background check. I mean, it sounds very simple, but I'm always amazed at the number that don't. They maybe would do their children's workers, but they would never think to do because they're just good guys or they're law enforcement. You need to think of this from a liability standpoint to protect yourself if something was to happen. If you have to stand on a witness stand and be questioned, you need to be prepared. If you've never done that before, it's incredibly intimidating. You need to be prepared to answer those questions and have that documentation of those things ready to go.
All right. Great stuff. Great stuff, Phil. All right. Well, I don't know if you want to segue now, but I want to remind people that there's a Q&A button. And so if you've got questions, go ahead and hit that and we'll try and address them either live or at the end, or even after the fact. We get a report of all the questions that are typed in. And so even if we can't answer the question tonight, we'll be able to answer them over the next day or so. So if you've got questions from what Phil is presenting tonight, hit the Q&A button, type in your question, and we'll try and get to you. All right, Phil, what's your next category that you'd like to share with us tonight?
Well, what I want to talk a little bit about. So if I'm discouraging just licensing everybody and permitting everyone on your safety team to carry a Glock on their side or whatever their weapon of choice may be, then what can you give your safety team to help them be effective in protecting the people that come on your campus? And that's really the meat of what I want to share with you guys and talk a little bit about tonight is, again, at these conferences, so much attention and focus is put on the active shooter and the weapons. But the truth of the matter is that's the low likely event. The highest likely event is going to be a medical emergency. You should be prepared for that. The federal statistics that are out there through the federal government shows that the most likely act of violence against the church is actually arson. And so you should be prepared for that. And then the next sort of most likely or high probability event is the disorderly person that comes into your church assembly, or the situation, perhaps a domestic situation that sort of happens in your church building. Those are all things that, again, you could go to these conferences and read all these books and be very prepared for the active shooter, but have no idea, and your people have no idea how to respond to that person who's coming into your church who is in a mental health crisis and does not know, and they're confronted with this person and they have no idea how to respond to that. So I want to give you guys a couple of resources. Again, tonight is just sort of baby steps, beginner. I want to encourage you. There are some great resources online. We can share those with you. If you email me, I'll be happy to share them with you. Going back to the active shooter and the training for ballistics, there's even organizations out there that will come in and do that sort of training if that's something you're interested in. But I want to give you two things to think about. The first is this. It's called the power of hello. You can look this up, the power of hello. And this is a dual win for you and your church. The power of hello is just simply this idea that whoever comes into your building, especially if they're not someone you immediately, we all have those folks that we know they're there, 50 out of 52 Sundays, so we know them. But we want to make everyone who comes into our services feel welcome. But the power of hello is that everyone who comes into the building gets a hello from your greeters, from your staff, whoever they might be. It's a hello. Now you can go and Google. There's TED Talks about the power of hello. Think about, if you go into a bank or any business, have you ever gone in, Tim, to say a business and you walk in and there's people working and they never look up from their computer screens and they never look up from the counter, and you're just standing there like, hello, I'm here. Can someone at least acknowledge that I've walked into your establishment? There is power in being seen and being acknowledged that I have seen you. So it's a win from that standpoint of training your people to whoever comes through the door, they get a hello. But what it also does, and this is where you really empower your let's say your greeting team to be a part of a layer of security in your time, is your greeters, if you train them, and there's some great resources out there, that when they are saying hello to someone, their radar is up and to pick up if something's not right. Think of your greeters as sort of your long range radar, if you will, that kind of sees out here, and your safety team is sort of your short range to a certain degree, like they're kind of dealing with what's in close proximity. And so the greeters, when they go up and they say hi to someone, hey, good morning, how are you doing? You can train your greeters on some things to watch for. If they go to someone and say, hey, good morning, how are you doing? And that person immediately walks the other way, or fails to make eye contact, or seems very uncomfortable or very kind of, anxious of what's going on. If they're carrying a backpack, if it's 90 degrees outside and they're wearing a coat, There's things in that hello when they're sort of to everyone, hey, how are you doing? That will help them gain some information, especially if it's someone they've never seen before. And so that's information. And so this is where that sort of the third win of this comes in. The statistics out there show that when someone comes into your building with the intention of doing harm, when they are met with a hello, basically told you are seen, and we mean that in a good way, right? We mean that as I see you, we're glad you're here, but they've been seen and acknowledged as seen, the probability of them actually following through on that act drops dramatically because they feel like instead of flying under the radar, they just got pinged by the radar. And so there tends to be, and you can look up all the different statistics and research and studies on this of well, the probability of that going down, and oftentimes they'll leave. And so your greeters or your staff, whoever your first impression teams are, most people don't think about training them to be part of that safety net of your gathering. And one of the things I want to encourage y'all who are watching is if you've never done that before, when you have a greeting meeting, you should have your greeters or your first impression team meet with your safety team. And they should meet together, or at least those leaders should, and they should talk about how can we work together. Last night here at Life Point, we actually did a tabletop exercise where we had all of our different teams come in and we walked through several scenarios and we had the team leaders in there. And it was like, hey, if this happens, children's ministry, what are you going to do? Greeters, what are you going to do if this person walks? Safety team, where are you going? Medical team. And so we talked through those different scenarios of how we would work together because everyone sort of has a role, not just your safety team and certainly not your staff. Most of your staff are going to have responsibilities other than that. They cannot be the people that you kind of rely on to do that because they're going to be distracted by other things. So I just want to encourage you the power of the hello and train with your volunteers on that. Even your children's ministry team, anyone can be a part of that. It's a win because you're saying hi to everybody, but it's also a win because you're casting this safety net of detecting. And our greeters know, like, hey, if you see something that looks suspicious, you need to go find a safety person to go, I need you to keep an eye on that guy. That something seems off there. And then our safety team is sort of the ones who take it from there and doing that. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that makes really sense.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the handoff is really important because the people that are more trained for the situation, they want to know who the long range radar identified. If you can say, hey, that guy right there, and then I got it. I was at a church service around Christmas time, and it was kind of dark. It's kind of Christmas Eve service, but they had a good security team, safety team, but I could see that they were looking at a guy, two guys. They were watching a guy out of the back, and so I was able to ask them after the service what's going on. And they said, "Well, we knew this guy. There's some domestic stuff going on, and the guy probably shouldn't have been there because his wife was in a different service, and they just thought it was odd." But you could tell that their training had kicked in and that they were in active monitoring of this guy that was sitting over there. And one of the security guys that was not identified came and sat near him, behind him. But then I was back in the back and they were watching him, and he told me that's the guy right there. And so you got guys that are trained, but that, they were in the auditorium as I want to know, as they're walking in the door, or even, now we're seeing a lot of greeters. This is a different training. We've also got webinars on first impressions, and which includes your greeters, but get your greeters outside the building, at the very least outside of the door, standing so that they're seeing people as they're coming through the parking lot as that first line of defense, so that they're not already in the building when you see someone that just seems out of place. I went to a church just a couple of weeks ago, a fairly decent sized church, and I was just going there to see. The preacher had asked me to come and to kind of view some things, but I didn't tell him I was coming, and he was preoccupied before the service. I walked in, went all the way around to the back, sat by myself, kind of in a corner, walked all the way back out after the service, and never not one person recognized me. And that's bad enough from a first impression standpoint, number one. But number two, if I'd had any reason to disturb that service. No one, I flew completely under the radar. And I just because I was quiet and I just kind of walked and found my way to the back of a dark auditorium, no one really knew I was back way back in the corner, all the way around on the back side, and to where I could see the side of the stage, I could see backstage, and I was in an interesting spot. And on my way out, I thought that, they should all think about safety a little bit more, because someone could enter and never be identified and recognized.
Well, and if you go back and look at some of the case studies, even in Virginia, I think about the couple who kidnapped the child. I believe it was in Abington area a couple of years ago. When they abducted that child, that was the third church, I believe, that they visited that morning or within a couple of weeks. And the reason why they did not abduct a child at those other churches is because they were confronted and questions were asked, and they realized, boom, we pinged their radar. We need to go to somewhere else. And so again, we don't often think of our first impressions as being a layer in our safety or security system, but they really truly are. And that's a real world situation right here in Virginia. Just recently, where
it was just a year ago, we did a webinar just after it happened on child safety, and we had scheduled it before that happened. But then, so there's a webinar in the playlist, in the safety and security playlist, that we talk about how do you make sure that people don't come into your building wanting to do harm to your kids. And the takeaway for me for that was, and this sounds really kind of backwards, but all you've got to do is be better than the church down the street, because the people that want to do harm are going to pick the easiest target. And so if your church is slightly better than the church down the street, your odds of them not choosing you go up. That's a good thing. And so you want to do the absolute best, but doing something that's right and trained. You don't feel like you have to do everything that the best church in America does. What you've got to do is you've got to tell someone that's coming on your property, we see you. And that in and of itself is the biggest first step. That's great.
That again, getting away from weapons and all of that, like probably one of the most effective tools you can give your teams is that hello. The second tool that I want to encourage everyone, and there's no way, because this is something that takes hours and hours of training, and I would encourage you to bring in, if you're serious about this, bring in some professional trainers in this area, and that is the Art of De-Escalation, which is what we call tonight's our time together, and that is learning how to de-escalate a situation. I'm just going to speak truthfully and freely here, and I think most of you who are watching this will appreciate it and maybe agree with it. So when I was chief of the fire department, we had almost 100 firefighters between career guys. Probably, I think we had about, 30 career guys, and we had about 70 volunteers. The type of people that are drawn to a safety, or if you still call it security team, the type of males and females that are drawn to that tend to be, and this is a broad brush, sort of alpha personalities, right? They're sort of alpha dogs, and that's sort of who they are. They don't want to run away from the problem. They sort of want to run to the problem. They want to fix the problem. They want to address the problem. They want to be in the mix of whatever is happening, which is great, because that's what we want. We want people who want to deal with the situation. The problem with that is, and I can tell you story after story of a fire scene or an accident scene or a medical call that I was on, where we were confronted by someone at that scene who was very agitated, right? When you're calling 911, it's not your best day. Things probably aren't that great. Somebody's wrecked, something's on fire, somebody's hurt, someone's sick. And so you're confronting people that's very angry. Maybe you're taking care of their loved one, and they don't think you're doing a very good job, or you're not doing everything you can do to save them, or you're not moving fast enough to save them. And so they can get very, very agitated or aggravated with you. And what happens for many alphas, unless you've been trained in the art of de-escalation, is that, and many of you alphas who are watching this, or you got loved ones or your family members who are alphas, when we are confronted with aggression, our natural posture, our natural reaction to that aggression, whether it's verbal or physical or whatever, is to meet aggression with aggression, right? Meet attitude with attitude, meet strength with strength. And so that's sort of where we naturally go. And I can tell you some stories, and probably you guys have some stories as well, where I've been in situations where I had to sort of back the dog down. I had somebody on my team or somebody on the call who was sort of making the situation worse than it already was, because they wanted to meet the person putting their chest out with them putting their chest out, thinking, well, they'll back down if I do this. And many times the people that we have on our safety teams, that may be their sort of their background, that may be sort of their personality, that's sort of the mode they go to. And that can be counterproductive in any environment. But think about it in a church campus where someone comes on, and there's different types of crisis that you might have happen. And so some things might be like, someone may come on who's mentally ill, and they're going through an episode, they're going through something mentally, a crisis situation, and they come onto your campus. Someone might have a medical condition. They might, if you've ever met someone whose sugar is off, or something else is off, that they can be very unpredictable and very loud and very almost like violent. I mean, I've certainly been in those situations. It may be situational stress. It may be that they're going through a divorce or a child custody situation, and now they've shown up on there, and now like this is happening, or maybe substance abuse. There's a variety of things that could lead to sort of a crisis situation where someone comes on your campus and now they're doing this. Now the question is this: how does your safety team respond to that situation? Maybe you guys have stories on how that happened. I can think of some times where we, not here at LifePoint particularly, but maybe didn't handle that the best, because again, the alpha met the alpha. So one of the best things you can do for your safety team is train them. And this takes training, because it is not natural for an alpha. It's not natural for someone who's sort of that to de-escalate the situation, not to escalate the situation. So let me give you some common signs of, and this is what I would teach your greeters, your volunteers, your safety team to look out for. When that person comes in, maybe you recognize them, maybe you don't, but maybe they're raising their voice. They're talking much louder because they want to be known. They want to be seen. They're kind of making a scene. I was talking to a church recently, and they had a guy show up for a Sunday morning service, and he was over at the cafe area, and he was just using profanity. And that's sort of right. That's a red flag. Like a guy shows up at a church service, or a lady, and they're walking around dropping this bomb and that bomb. That's gonna ping your radar. Something's off here. Someone who's talking really fast and you can't really understand what they're saying. Someone who's pacing, or they're sweating, or they won't make eye contact, or they're really exaggerated hand gestures. I use my hands a lot, but I mean exaggerated hand gestures, fidgeting, shaking. Someone who's got sort of a clenched chin, or these are all things that if you go through de-escalation training, you're going to learn, like, these are things you watch for. And not just to watch for before the incident or the moment. You're kind of watching that before, but once this person has made themselves aware. Okay, so let's say this person comes in and they're mad because they wanted some, let's say, some money for something, and you said, no, that's not how we work. We do this. They go, no, I need this now. And now they're getting louder, and they're using exaggerated hand motions, and they're getting louder and louder. Now your safety team has to step in. What happens next is often going to determine how this situation goes. If the person walks up from the safety team and goes, hey, take that outside now. You're not going to come in here acting like that. And suddenly again, it's the chest out. I'm going to meet aggression with aggression. I'm going to tell you how it is. I had a guy say once, I was taught to meet or to mirror how someone was acting. So if they were loud and acting aggressive, you were supposed to act loud and aggressive back, and that's how you back them down. If that's what you were taught, it's wrong. It's very wrong. So now that you have this situation, how your safety team reacts to that may determine whether or not anyone in that building gets hurt. So let's talk about the liabilities and risk here. Whether or not they get hurt, whether or not you have a lawsuit brought later, because what are the rules of engagement on putting hands on a person? Like, when can you put your hands on somebody? Some people don't know that, when that is okay to do. So all of a sudden they do that, and guess who's going to be held liable for that? You are. And they're going to ask, did you provide any training for this safety team you have? And if you didn't, you're going to be found negligent. So that's why this safety thing is really important, because it's a liability risk, but it's also a safety risk. I want to, again, there's no way we could teach a full de-escalation class. I just want to introduce some of the basics here. The type of crisis you'll have, things to watch out for, understanding that how you react initially to that person, who is the first person to make contact with that person, who is agitated, making a scene, will determine oftentimes where this thing will go. And de-escalation training, just so you know, if you've never been through it before, it's all about communication. People who have been trained in this, and people that have been in high anxiety or high stress situations, you know who's sort of been there. I don't know how many of you ever met someone who's like, there's a few guys I know who are like, man, I'm as comfortable in a firefight as I am shopping at Walmart. And that's a scary thing for someone to say, but they've been over in different parts of the world doing different things that I don't know about, but they've been in that environment so many times, they're very comfortable there. In the fire department, once you start working your way up to captain and chief, you can listen to the radio traffic and you can tell the demeanor and the voice inflection of the guys. If you're calm, everyone else, stress and chaos is contagious, but so is calming. So what happens next is your team steps in and begins to cool and calm down the situation. So communication, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but 93% of communication has nothing to do with the words you choose. People often say, well, I don't want to step into that situation because I don't know what to say. And what I always tell people is, it doesn't matter what you say, it's how you say it. It's your body language and it's your tone. Teaching your safety team to not throw the chest out, not to meet aggression with aggression, but to simply walk over, hands, distance, and with a calm voice. Hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? And there's these tactics that begin to happen when you get into the art of de-escalation, of you begin to listen to them. And you begin to, even if Tim, you might have gone through in like counseling classes, you learn the art of mirroring somebody and sort of reflecting emotions, right? That's part of de-escalation. It sounds like that really made you upset. It sounds like you're really concerned about that. And so you begin to show empathy to the person. This is not a normal path to take if you're a typical alpha, again, to say, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to drop my tone down, I'm going to slow down what I'm saying. By the way, your slower voice, believe it or not, there's studies out there that will show that it brings heart rates down. The lower and the slower, go down an octave, slow down to about half speed. When you go down an octave and you go down to about half speed, you will have a physiological impact on that person and bringing the situation down. Now I'm talking to you, I'm asking you what's going on. And that sounds like you're really upset. I'm building rapport with you. I'm building a level of trust with you. Safety teams, your job in this moment, in my opinion, is to do one thing. You're buying time. At this point, if you have multiple safety teams, what should be happening is someone should be off to the side, calling the proper authorities to have them respond to your scene, because you have someone who's unruly, not really sure what they're up to or what they're capable of, so they're calling for help. While you are just simply, the studies show the longer time you can pull out, the more calming things will get. The time's actually a friend in this. So as you begin to lower your voice, slow your talk, mirror or reflect their feelings, build empathy, build rapport, you're just beginning to sort of settle things down until the proper people get there that can do what they need to do. Now, here's the important thing as I sort of wrap this part up and we can open up to questions. While this is happening, while your safety team is having this conversation with this individual or individuals, your kids ministry should be knowing what to do. There should be an action plan in place that when this goes down, we lock down our kids' space. How do you notify them? Who's doing that? Do the volunteers know what to do? The people in the worship room, if this is happening in the foyer? Do they know what to do? Does all your team players know that when this, because this is the most, everybody, let's talk about active shooter and what goes down in this, but this is the most likely of event other than medical emergency, is this sort of irate person who's upset. Do you as a team, because you really should be working as a team, know how to react in this situation? So that's sort of my plea to you. Be careful with the guns. I know it's the popular thing to talk about and just go, great, you have a concealed weapon permit, you must have passed some sort of test, take it. No, the two most important things I think you can give to your teams: the art of hello, that's your long range radar, and this de-escalation tactics. If you want to know more about it, how to do it, be trained in it, love to talk to you about it. There's some great resources out there, but it is our responsibility. It is our responsibility when these people come to our campus to protect them. So yeah.
Yeah, there you go. We've got a few minutes here, and we've had two questions so far from Richard and James, just about, can you give even without endorsing, but some examples of some training and what the schedule of training could look like, and the kind of vendors you could actually try and to use to come in and do the training rather than trying to recreate the wheel.
So I'll sort of take you up the ratchet. There's things as simple as PDFs you can download online. There are great YouTube videos out there that can try to kind of train your people in this, all the way up to organizations. And there's one organization called Gentle Response, I believe is the name of it, where they actually will bring people on your site. Most of them are retired law enforcement, and they will put you in real world stressful situations with your teams, with your team of volunteers. I mean, they're like yelling at them. It's real deal and it's intense. Look it up. And basically trying to stress them out. Like, you want them to stress, because that's the way that you kind of break them and teach them. So you can go all the way from something as simple as, hey, here's an article on de-escalation, here's a YouTube video on de-escalation, or you can bring in professionals. And there's actually some teams out there that specifically work with churches in de-escalation. But I am not a certified de-escalation trainer. I've had lots of de-escalation training, but I am not a certified de-escalation trainer. But I love working with people, talking to them, and just about some of the simple tactics of it.
One question I would have, I don't know the answer to, is if there's de-escalation training in civic circles, are you allowed to bring your church safety team guys or gals there, rather than trying to bring people on your campus if they're teaching this at the firehouse?
Yeah.
Are you usually welcoming this kind of?
Yeah, there are some localities that will do sort of de-escalation training and invite nonprofit organizations to come in and sort of go through some of that. There's some law enforcement departments in Virginia that have done that. I don't know who's doing that right now, but that's certainly a resource you could look at.
Yeah. All right. Well, there will be a follow-up email that goes out in 24 hours. It's an automated email that goes out for everybody that participated tonight. And in that, we're going to include some links to some samples. It's not necessarily recommendations, but just some samples of a PDF or a YouTube that would allow you to see, kind of crack the door open and see where you can head if you search for the right things for training and videos and PDFs in these areas. And so you can look for those kind of things in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow. We'll also have Phil's email address in that follow-up email. And so if you've got some even follow-on questions for him about, hey, this is where we're at, what's our next step, that he would be happy to help you take the next step in keeping your people safe and secure on your campus. Any other questions before we kind of close the question loop here tonight? The two questions that we had so far were about training programs. Where do we find those? There are church security, church safety vendors that help with the training. I think a lot of it's video driven, isn't it? I'm trying. The one that
You
I've
can
seen,
do
they've
that,
got
or you can
modules.
there's different resources that are out there. There's some that do a really good job. I'm gonna just say this again. My experience has been a lot of people are out there and they want to teach you all about active shooter, and they'll take your money in a heartbeat and train you on that and talk to you to death about that. I would just encourage you, find a place that's talking about de-escalation and talking about how to train your people to work as a team to address those situations. Yeah. active shooter thing's
Yeah.
important. You should have a plan for that, but don't spend 95% of your time there.
Yeah, we'll put a list together tomorrow. Let me tell you about a couple of things here as we're closing up. Our webinar next month is coming up on April 11th, right before Easter, and rediscovering disciple making for your church. During COVID, when we weren't doing the big show every week, we discovered that the church can move forward as we continue to disciple one more person at a time. And so that was already kind of in the mix in the church pre-COVID, that there was the Holy Spirit was bubbling that up. And so we're trying to provide some training and orientation on how you can ratchet that up to a new level at your church. I also want to tell you very quickly, our podcast, if you like webinars, you probably like podcasts as well. We started a podcast just a little over a year ago. We're about 30 episodes in, drops every other week. Mark Moore, his podcast about preaching is going to drop tomorrow. And so if you go on our website, there's a tab that you can subscribe to that, and that you'll be notified. All the platforms are there. I listen to them through Spotify, but a lot of the other platforms are there. And so we would love for you to join that podcast. And we've got a great leader that's talking on a different topic about ministry every other week. And there's also just in September, we've got a second podcast just for ministry wives, ministry spouses. And so you can sign up for both of those on our website with the podcast tab, and we'd love for you to be a subscriber to that. In our first year, we had more than 2,500 downloads of our podcast episodes. So we were really pleased that leaders like you are trying to better themselves through hearing from other leaders in the region that are in the trenches with you, and teaching what they've been learning for others to hear from what they share. Well, thank you for your time tonight. Phil, thank you for taking the time to share with us kind of this overview about how we can start looking with different eyes on Sunday morning, and how we can collaborate as teams to make sure we're all on the same page. It really didn't help if one person notices something but doesn't know how to hand the baton to the next person. So we're all working together, and that's going to we're going to need some training, interdepartmental training, to make sure we're all on the same page when this happens or this happens or this happens. And so I don't know, one question that might have been kind of asked, will be our last question, is there any kind of standard schedule of training that you would recommend? Once a year on a Saturday, or quarterly, or twice a year? Or I know that's a choice, but if a church asks you, how often should we train, what would you suggest their schedule be?
I think individually as teams, you guys need to be training at least once or twice, once every month or two, getting everybody together and just reminding them of that. I mean, it really is a consistent reminder. And the other is, I think quarterly to at least a couple times a year, having all of your teams together in one place so they can discuss how that hands off. And your ministry team leaders, your team leaders should be together, probably quarterly. Having all your volunteers for a full-on exercise, is probably once or twice a year as well. So there's different kind of levels of that: the individual ministry teams, the team leaders, and then having everyone together.
Yeah. So you got to build that into your church rhythm, your church calendar, or
regularly is the answer. Regularly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you've got to put it on the calendar and say, this is what we do. And a lot of churches fall into that trap of saying, oh, we did that, a year ago. Well, how much has your volunteer turnover had in the last year? And so you can't assume that everybody's on the same page unless you've got some regular rhythm of training and reminding of the training, because it sinks in deeper the second, third, fourth time around. So we hope everybody that's on our webinar tonight, and that will view later on our YouTube channel, just really take seriously the responsibility and the opportunity to keep your people safe as they're coming to have their lives transformed by the word of God as part of a community of faith. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you next month at our webinar about reigniting the disciple-making quotient in your church. We'll see you then.